I've got a ton of stories, man. I think, and some I'm probably not for.
Well, those are the ones I want to hear.
You know what
I mean, this is why we're on a podcast, because I want to hear the stories that not everybody knows. You don't have to name names.
On both sides of the deck, both when I was visiting and when I was hosting, I've got some really interesting stories, man.
Well, first tell me the official visits you had before you made your choice.
Okay.
Give me 2 or 3 schools.
Well, I'll put it like this: like, I visited UCF, and I was visiting UCF frequently. UCF really loved me, because we're right down the road.
Was Mike Kruchek the coach at that time?
I think it was Kruchek at that time, and I remember the guy who was recruiting me was an awesome recruiter. He went on to be on the staff when Auburn won their national championships with Cam Newton. So his name's Coach Frost. Brilliant recruiter, very, very talented coach, and just a smooth guy. I remember how he impacted me as a salesman. You know what I mean? Because I didn't want I didn't want to stay in Orlando. There was Orlando. I mean, shit, you remember Orlando? Like, Orlando, I wanted to get out of Orlando on the first thing smoking, man. And I appreciate what Orlando gave to me, but I just knew that there was more out there.
100%. I've been in Vegas 13 years. Okay. Right. I don't miss Orlando one bit. Exactly for what you just said. Yeah. I appreciate what it gave me while I was there, but this is our new journey. You're in Atlanta. Atlanta's a huge, big market city with a lot of opportunities. Yeah. And I love where I'm at in Las Vegas. So we're living testaments of pivoting, making that move out of our hometown, so to speak. Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, we're on board there. So you wanted a chance out of Orlando. You visited UCF. Was there any other schools besides UCF that you took a visit to, or you had an opportunity to visit to, and maybe you just passed on?
So sort of the recruiting process is interesting. So once you commit, you're not going to have the same level of interest from the other schools. Mm-hmm. Well, I committed to Georgia Tech as soon as I came. However, as soon as I came on my visit, which was, I think it was like November, because I remember my roommate on the trip, who I'm still good friends with to this day, had a basketball game, and he came to the official visit late. So, like, there were schools that recruited me that I wasn't able to visit because I fell in love with Tech when I did, right? So I fell in love with, like, as soon as I stepped off that plane, dog, I was like, yo, this is it. Atlanta airport was fire. We came to the facility. The facility was dope. At the time, UCF was developing. So while UCF showed me a lot of love, and I went on a lot of unofficial visits, if you get where I'm going, which was cool. And I mean that respectfully. I'm not going to say anything that would put any of those guys in in any kind of situation. You know what I mean? But as soon as I got to Tech, just seeing the facilities, seeing the campus looked like an Ivy League school. As a matter of fact, they filmed what's that movie with Tom Green? It was a movie with Tom Green in like the early 2000s. They filmed it at Tech because of its aesthetics, because of the construction. It's got that Ivy League look, and it was just beautiful. My mom fell in love with it too. And then they took me to 2 clubs. They took me to the AUC, first of all, which, if you've never heard of the AUC, and I'm not sure if your listeners in Vegas or all over would know what the AUC is. Well, the AUC is where all the Black universities and the historically Black colleges and universities are in Atlanta. So there's Clark, Spelman, Morehouse. And I had never seen, growing up primarily in Orlando, I had never seen, like, this many Black kids in concentration, right? Like, I've never seen that many Black kids together, because Colonial was super diverse. Mostly white and Hispanic, but still very diverse. So I saw all of these Black kids that were doing well, good students, making good decisions, concentrated in this place. Well, also Black girls, you know what I mean? Which Colonial didn't have an abundance of. So my host at the time, a guy named Greg Gathers, probably one of the best football players in ACC history. He would have gotten, that's a whole nother tangent, but before he got drafted, he had kidney failure, so he couldn't be. Like, this guy, he had better stats than Julius Peppers, and they were in the same draft class. So I will go on record and say Greg Gathers even watching film, objectively was a better football player than Julius Peppers.
Quick question, Omar.
Yeah.
When you go on a visit and you have a host, do they primarily line you up with someone from your position group?
So sometimes, so sometimes, yes. So, but
not
also,
always though. Not always.
Not always. Okay. So, for instance, like if there's a big name star, like for instance, like who's a big name in college football right now, like Trevor Lawrence, right? He may be the host for a big wide receiver who's coming out. You know what I mean? They're gonna line those two guys up in terms of the caliber, the notoriety, you know, what they're gonna make this kid's experience feel like when he visits Clemson. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's not always position group, but oftentimes it is.
So I totally get it. So traditionally, Trevor Lawrence isn't going to host a linebacker. It's going to be a star from that side of the ball primarily, or
probably.
Okay,
yeah,
probably. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. So you're at Tech. You fall in love immediately. The airport. They take you to the AUC. You're seeing, the type of girls you're not accustomed to seeing back in Orlando. The experience. Okay. So just give us 60 seconds of one of those stories that you're like, I don't know if I should share. Give us just 60 seconds of one of those good stories that people that will listen, that were a part of that, and people that are not a part of that, you're going to entertain them. 60 seconds. The floor is yours.
Well, I've already said names, which is probably dangerous, but like my host took me to this club called Esso's at the time, and Esso's is where like the Falcons, the Hawks, all of these big, they're buying sections like the Ludacris videos at the time, Esso's 112, like these places were in hip hop videos. Well, he took me there and I'm just like, oh my God, I've never my mind is blown with what I'm seeing in regards to just like women, you know what I mean? And it was what it was. You add some alcohol in there. Yes, I was underage. All right, that's my fault. I made the choice. It wasn't, but the rest is history. It was like the city of Atlanta is, in conjunction with what Georgia Tech had to offer, was what sold me on coming to Atlanta. And honestly, I'm still in Atlanta. I've moved, I lived in DC and that was cool. But Atlanta has all of these things to offer, man. A bunch of
Omar, at 16, 17, did you know Atlanta was what it was? I mean, as adults, you know the hip hop community in Atlanta, the celebrity, T.O., so many guys, so many pro athletes, so many entertainers. They have homes in Atlanta in the off season. Guys that are doing films or doing work or doing business out in LA, they live in Atlanta. Did you know at the time in Orlando how I don't even know, I can't get the word out. How big Atlanta was? Did you know anything about that before you took your visit and experienced Atlanta?
I didn't realize how cosmopolitan Atlanta itself was. I just kind of knew Atlanta as a place that people, I kind of processed it at that time, I always thought it was more of a country place. You know what I mean? Like I made an association that just didn't really make sense, Well,
because sometimes you think of Georgia and the state aligned with it, and that's where you go.
And that's probably what it was. Well, when I got here, it was like that's not what I thought it was. And interestingly enough, it's the same thing. Like when you go to Nashville, if you've ever been to Nashville, they call it Nash Vegas, a beautiful city.
Never been.
You've never been? Yeah.
Never been.
It's a beautiful city, but like when you think about it, I think about country music or whatever. Well, Atlanta was kind of similar. I thought it was going to be a super country place, and it was just awesome. And you bring up T.O. Like I worked security at one of his house parties before. Like I've got all these crazy stories when I was in school, and at that party. So at that party, Pac-Man. So there's a Pac-Man story from that party. I'll leave it at that.
No, you can't leave it at that. We need some details.
One of the ways that we made money in school, because there was all those NCAA rules and stuff like that is we would work security at these places under the table.
Oh, so you were a player at the time?
Was I a player at the time? Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Or a student. Okay.
So yeah.
Look, the grace period's over. They can't come after you. It's statute of limitation. This is a podcast. There's linguistics on speaking on podcasts where nobody's liable. Not T.O., not Pac-Man, not Omar or his family. So this is all good.
Okay, fair enough. So I'm being respectful of all of those things, right? Well, I'm working security at this party because we used to get security gigs just to make some quick money under the table. And it's like, just stand there and be big. You know what I mean? Which is essentially what the security job was. Like, we weren't fighting anybody, or anything crazy like that. So
fortunately, you weren't with Pac-Man there. Look, I love Pac-Man. I'm not trying to take a jab. It just happened recently. So I love you, Pac-Man. No shot.
Right. But. Well, at this party at T.O. at this party, this girl, there's a lot of girls there, obviously. There's entertainers, there's athletes.
Just give us a small time frame, Omar. Are we talking 2004?
This is probably 2004, 2005, because I think he either got drafted. He's a class behind me. He either just got drafted or was on his way to get drafted because he had money and he had a big name at the time. Mm-hmm. And I'm working security at this party, right? And he's one of the, I guess, headliners at this party at T.O.'s crib, which is a beautiful house in Lithonia. You know what I mean? So there's girls there, and there's girls flirting. They know what time it is. And this girl pushed Pac-Man in the pool, right? And Pac-Man is a stud. Like, I think for people who don't really know Pac-Man like that, or understand football at the level that, like, Pac-Man was an amazing football player.
Yes.
And, he
was a top 15 pick, I believe.
He was. He's a phenomenal football player. And his physicality was one of the reasons that he was so good. He could tackle, he could return punts, he could cover. He was just incredibly well-rounded as a player. Yes. Now, he's gotten a lot of bad publicity for his own choices, and I'm sure the media's put an extra spin on some of these situations and
sure,
whatever. And I don't know him like that personally. Right. I'm going to be clear with that. But what I want to give the proper context for is he was physical. Well, this girl pushes him in the pool, right? And it's playful. He gets out of the pool. And my man got a running start and drills her into the pool. And you see this 120-pound girl in there. And like in the middle of this pool. And everybody's like, Jesus Christ. They're like, this guy hit this. When I say hit, like play.
Yeah. Like so clearly he didn't think it was extremely hilarious that he got pushed in.
Right.
Wow.
At the same velocity that he would, a 230-pound running back. And it made for a memory. Like the guy.
Yeah, probably the sight of her flying through the air was like something that you haven't experienced before.
God, what do we do? Is she alive? You know what I mean? So there was no, nothing bad came of it. It was just the memory that I have from working security at T.O.'s house party. You know what I mean? Yeah.
If you're just jumping in, this is Omar Billy, former defensive tackle at Georgia Tech, former teammate of mine in Orlando, Florida at Colonial High School. We're catching up here on the Rest Stop podcast. Omar, so you chose Georgia Tech, and there's a couple guys that went through the ranks of Georgia Tech along your way that we can reflect on now, and have put together Hall of Fame careers in whatever they chose to do. Specifically, just give us a couple quick stories about some of your more memorable teammates and maybe what surprised you when you walked into maybe one of your first weeks of practice or games at Georgia Tech. Clearly for me, what I remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, what stands out to me about Omar Billy going to Georgia Tech is committed, great size, and great strength. And you can see it today, Omar, with the videos you post. You talked about strength. You've always been a powerhouse. So is that accurate when I'm describing your transition from high school to football, size and strength? Clearly, you probably weren't as strong as a freshman as you were a senior. But tell me that, and then tell me what it was like in a locker room full of guys and what stood out to you as the difference when like, wow, clearly the facilities, but the players specifically. What was your experience like when you first got into a game or practice as you became a student athlete at Georgia Tech?
Well, I would say one of the biggest things with the transition from high school to college is the speed of the game. Like, everybody's good. You know what I mean? Like, and everybody's really good. So it's not just that, it's not just that they're fast. They're really good players. So you may have been the stud on your high school campus. You may have been a multi-sport athlete. You may have done X, Y, and Z. But so did like 100% of the people that they recruited and 100% of the people that you're competing against. I remember, I remember getting to campus and that being something that was like, wow, like these guys are good too. You know what I mean? And like some of them are really, really good. And so that's humbling, but it also breeds the, competition as well. And so I would say that was one of the things that really is a difference maker, or a difference in, the transition from high school to college. It's like, man, everybody's good and everybody's really good. And even the people who are not really that good have a bunch of potential to be good. You know what I mean? So like they're there for a reason. I remember my defensive line coach. I remember one of my fellow defensive linemen got beat on a play. And I remember my coach just saying, hey, that guy's on scholarship too. And it was like, damn, that's real. You know what I mean? Because that guy's good too. You know what I mean?
Tell me something position specific, maybe early on when you talk about everyone's good. I just want a quick idea. You as a defensive lineman, tell me about a drill or tell me about the offensive line caliber. Okay, we had a few good guys on our line when you were sophomore. Now, I wasn't sure how it necessarily evolved. Still a few good guys as you went on. But of course, here's what I know to be the difference for sure. Okay, maybe you have 2 or 3 good guys, the guys that will get scholarships going into high school. But like you said, everyone's on scholarship. So talk about some of the matchups with the offensive linemen. I mean, you're talking about size, strength. What separated some of the guys you win against on your offensive line just in team drills, Georgia Tech, compared to guys that you were accustomed to or you saw before? Talk about that just real quick.
Well, the guys could move too. The offensive lineman could move too. We had a guy. I mean, there were a lot of really good players. So there's a lot of stories that accompany this. You know what I mean? But all of the linemen could move and they were strong and, and they're athletic too. So they're agile, they could position their bodies well. And that's what made it tough. That's what makes it so competitive. So when you see guys like, Aaron Donald getting, double-digit sacks every year, being relatively undersized, it is phenomenal. And I don't believe that the casual football watcher understands what it takes to do that, to be dominating other athletes. It's important that like legends continue to dominate winners. So that's why Aaron Donald is a legend. Like everybody you see in the NFL is damn good, right? And this guy is annihilating those guys. So imagine how good he must be. You know what I mean? We were talking about that with our Calvin experience the other day on when I had my buddy come and train with me a few weeks ago. And it's like, all of us were good, but like it put things in perspective when you see Calvin, who is phenomenal. Like, and I'll argue this. The reason why Calvin, to me, is the GOAT. And I'll acknowledge being partial to him because we're teammates and I know him, he's my buddy. You know what I mean? The reason that he will always be the greatest to me is a very similar argument that I make for Barry Sanders as being the best running back. Like, now metrics, and there's data that says Jerry Rice is far and away the best receiver ever. And there's one study that based on these metrics in his production says that he's the best player ever. Jerry Rice, which I want to give him a ton of credit for. I'm a huge Jerry Rice fan. My argument, however, is, and I'm careful not to make this an indictment on Jerry Rice or anybody else who were great football players and made incredible contributions to the game, to society, and all of this. I just don't believe that they would do it anywhere where Calvin did. You see what I'm saying? Where Barry Sanders did. Right? So you want to have conversations with Emmitt Smith and Barry Sanders in the same breath, and it just doesn't fit to me, dog. Like, I can't rationalize Emmitt Smith doing that in Detroit. Similarly,
Omar, this is the great thing about sports debates and conversations, because I love the different angles that people have. Because me and you are aligned in our thought process. I think for me and you, especially listening to you, we've watched, played, experienced enough football. We know what our eyes see, right? And we're not diminishing Emmitt Smith, Jerry Rice. Some people just can't necessarily get their minds wrapped around some of the bubble nostalgia, if that was their time period of really enjoying football, and putting it in a prism of what their eyes are telling them against the competition they're against at that time, and how it would transition, which is kind of what you're saying, the transitional thing. Jerry Rice, of course, statistically, and some would argue, the greatest football player ever. But I'm in alignment with your thought process, a Barry Sanders, a Calvin Johnson. What our eyes tell us transitions all walks and all times of football, and that could rarely, if ever, be duplicated. Am I correct on that?
Correct. That's my belief. Like, there are certain players that excel in systems and conditions. And, God bless them for the timing and for what they've done, because they made it memorable like they did. I appreciate what they did. And so I appreciate seeing Jerry Rice and, make it to all these levels, incredibly accomplished. I can't say enough about these guys and other people who they may say, or who they would argue would be better than Calvin. It just doesn't make sense to me. Like, for Calvin to do what he did in the conditions that he did it and still be in the conversation is incredible.
All right, Omar, I'm going to bring a tough one to you. I got to put my guy in it. Randy Moss, Calvin Johnson. How would you break it down if you had to take one?
Right. If I had to take one.
And why?
If I had to take one, I would still take Calvin. And the reason why is this. Randy Moss, one of my favorite players ever. And I mean that. Like, he, aside from Calvin, is my favorite receiver ever. Hands down. I still use Moss as a verb. He's the first person to have his name become a verb in my understanding, in my belief. So Randy Moss deserves a ton of credit too. And I actually bought the striped socks that he used to wear at Marshall. Like, I love Randy Moss. You remember those striped socks back at Marshall?
I remember them. Yes, sir.
So the reason why I would choose Calvin is because Calvin had the ability to moss people, the verb that we're using.
Yes.
But also, Calvin, like, he connected all the dots with the intangibles that we're talking about with winners before. Like, off the field, Calvin is a phenomenal person. And that's not saying that Randy Moss isn't. But one of the hits, or one of the black eyes on Randy Moss's career, is when he went to Oakland and didn't perform at the level that he's capable of. I don't see Calvin ever taking an L like that. You see what I'm saying?
I know exactly what you're saying. You're saying Calvin Johnson was not only a fantastic football player, he was a fantastic teammate.
Fantastic teammate, fantastic person. And it's almost weird to me how good of a person he is, like how down to earth he is for having accomplished what he accomplished. Like, dude, I saw him not long ago. And, playing ball on, in the ACC, if somebody makes it, some guys get big time, you know what I mean? All of a sudden they're brand new, you know what I mean? And I think that's unfortunately natural. but that was never Calvin. And Calvin made it way further and way better than anybody that we played with. And even people that we know in our circle. Like, nobody in my social circle like knows Jerry Rice. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But for instance, a guy at my wedding, one of my best friends in the world, he won a Super Bowl. That's dope. It's incredible. He brought me up to New York, showed me the town. I love him. He was in my wedding. You know what I mean? So this guy has access to people like Michael Strahan and, people that were his teammates at the time. And he would say the same things about Calvin that I'm saying, like the level of like how far ahead. You got to look up this quote from Nate Burleson about Calvin.
Former Viking, former Lion.
Yeah, right. How far ahead Calvin was from other professional players. And it's like, but like, though, when you see him in person, you understand it. And everybody has the same type of story. Everybody has like a Calvin story, if not many of them. The first time this guy did a vertical jump in our weight room at school, like everything stopped. It's like the music in the it was like, what is happening? You know what I mean? And he was up there, it seemed like, for like 10 minutes. You know what I mean? When he jumped. He power cleaned more than I did. Woo. Calvin, wide receiver, power cleaned more than I did as a defensive lineman. And I wasn't a weak guy. You know that.
Yeah. Omar, this is crazy. And I want to pick your brain on some deep psychology I'm about to hit you with when you're talking about an elite performer.
Yeah.
Because I love this because, and we're not saying by any means that Randy Moss was a bad teammate at all or anything, but we're talking about tiers, okay? Yeah. And Calvin Johnson has earned the tier that he's got as Hall of Famer, not only elite performer, but elite teammate. And it's shown by the resume of consistency. So it's not a knock on Jerry, it's not a knock on Moss, but Calvin Johnson, through his resume, you're a teammate, so you can speak to it.
Yeah.
The consistency of who he was on and off the field, and those things you cannot analytically dissect through statistics.
Right.
And it's unfortunate when people reflect on the game that they don't attach Super Bowl champion to Calvin Johnson, and that the Detroit franchise wasn't able to give service to not only Calvin, but Matt Stafford as well. But he is now a Hall of Famer. We will congratulate him on that. And it's a feat that some may argue, would you rather be a Hall of Famer or Super Bowl champion? So that's well-deserved. I want to dive into something, Omar, that not a lot of people talk about. When you talk about elite athletes, because this is something I think about consistently, because I love to analyze and deep dive the intricacies of the game. Okay, so we're talking about of all the greatness that Calvin possessed as a player on and off the field. I want to know who deep dived into what was Calvin Johnson's weakness, because if I was an ACC defender, I would live every moment of every day. I don't care if I had to search Facebook or whatever. I want to know what makes him agitated, what makes him tick, what his weaknesses are. And I would do everything in my power to figure out a way to stop him, because most would say you can't stop him. I never believe that. I believe everyone can be stopped. You just have to find their weakness. Right. And sometimes you have to dig deeper. Now, on the outside looking in, Calvin was banged up with some injuries at times. Was there anything that somebody would be able to find that you'd be willing to share, that somebody could say, or even a story of a game where somebody got the best of Calvin Johnson?
The short answer to that is absolutely not. So
I knew that was the answer.
It's absolutely not, and that's no cap. That's no BS. Like, I have no reason to. I've already probably said more than I should have on this recording, which is cool, and I know it's all fun, but the guy was like a created player, bro. Like, what are the things they used to have, these speed cleats that only receivers got when we came to school, right? These low cut cleats that were like, I forget, they were Nike Speed, whatever. You know what I mean? Only cornerbacks and and receivers basically wore these. Not even running backs, right? Only cornerbacks and receivers got these cleats. And I remember when Calvin's he got these receivers. I didn't even think they made them in this size. They were like a size 15 or 16 or whatever. So he's this big. He's as strong as I told you before. He runs excellent routes and has incredible body control. Look up.
Oh, you see some of that in just the highlights.
incredible body control. And bruh, his hands are like, you know, like like when you stand next to him, it's like, bro, what's happening? You know what I mean? So he was, and he had this kind of long speed too. So he ran a 4.3 at the combine, which of course is enough credibility, but he had like game speed too. So he's running past small, fast guys, and he's the size of a defensive end. Come on, bro. You know what I mean? And with incredible body control, and he's a phenomenal person too. So you're not shutting him down. You're just not. Now, I guess his weakness would be a quarterback who's not throwing to. I don't know. I don't know. Like, you know, if we try to make, you know, if we try to rationalize it, right? But other than that, no. Like, I really feel like, and this is not an exaggeration, I feel like if Calvin chose to play any position on the field, he could have. And that includes being a pass rusher who gets, you know, he's just like one of those athletes, like Zion Williams. Like, to me, if Zion wanted to play football, he could. I met him in person, and I'm like, yo, you are a freak of nature. You are blessed. That's the kind of presence that Calvin has physically. You know what I mean?
He really does. He's rare. And that's one thing on Randy Moss too. Calvin's physicality is just unmatched at that position.